So, you sent us some info about this Karnataka Band thing happening, and we knew you'd probably be right in the thick of it, so we thought we'd dive into what's actually going on.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
All right, so it is officially Band Day in Karnataka, and looking at what we've got, seems like it's the fourth Saturday of the month. Makes it feel very much like it's happening live. This call for a band, they said it was going to run from 6 this morning until 6 tonight. I guess the big question, and the one that really got us digging into this, is this really a total shutdown, like some folks are saying? Or is it, well, maybe a little less dramatic than that?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
So if you're out and about today, what are you likely to run into? We went through everything we could find about this band, wanted to figure out who's behind it all, what they want, and maybe most importantly, what you can actually expect to see out there today.
Well, right off the bat, there's something kind of interesting about having a band, a full stop to everything happening on a day like today. Because it's the fourth Saturday, a lot of the usual weekday stuff is already on hold. Government offices, banks, a good number of private companies, they usually take the day off.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
So calling for a massive shutdown on a day when things are already kind of shut down
Mm.
is, well, it makes you think about what they're really hoping to achieve versus what's actually going to happen.
Okay, so maybe that picture of Karnataka coming to a grinding halt is a little overblown, considering it's already a weekend and things are quieter. But it's not like this ban has no effect just because it's Saturday, right? I mean, there are going to be specific areas where people are going to see and feel a difference, and that's what matters if you're trying to go about your day. What we're seeing is that auto rickshaws and cabs are likely to be off the roads, especially in Bengaluru and a few other districts. So that ride-sharing app might not be much help today.
Right.
And if you were thinking of catching a movie this morning, looks like those early shows might be canceled. So anyone hoping to get an early start on their weekend entertainment might have to change their plans. On top of that, we've heard some private schools and colleges have decided to call it a day. Probably a mix of playing it safe and maybe giving those students an unexpected day off.
Yeah, you're right. Seems like the disruptions are mainly in areas where they can either easily get people to stop working or where safety is a big concern. Transportation services, your autos and cabs, they're usually the first to shut down during bans because they're worried about vandalism or pressure from the organizers. Canceling those morning movie showings is like a very visible way to show that things are disrupted. And the decision by some schools and colleges to close, well, that shows they're putting the safety of their students and staff first. But if you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, what's really interesting is what's still up and running, even with this band going on.
Right. The life goes on, mostly, kind of thing.
Exactly.
And this is where it gets interesting if you're thinking about your day. Government and private bodies, the BMTC and KSRTC, they're apparently planning to stick to their usual schedules. So that's a big part of public transport that's still running. And for those of you in Bengaluru, looks like the metro is going to keep going, which is usually pretty reliable even when other transportation is messed up. So if you're anywhere near a metro line, that might be your best bet for getting around.
Yeah, good point.
And maybe the most important thing for a decent weekend. Restaurants and bars seem to be open for business. So if you were looking forward to that Saturday morning masala dosa and filter coffee, looks like you're still good to go. It kind of paints a picture of a band that has a definite impact, especially on getting around if you rely on those individual rides. But it's not a total shutdown of important services or your weekend plans.
Yeah, you've got it. And that really leads to a big question. If so much is still operating, what's the point of this ban? Why call for this big shutdown if it's not going to have a huge effect, especially on a weekend when things are already closed? To understand that, we have to look at the demands that are driving this protest, the one organized by Canada Okuda. There are several long-standing issues that are at the heart of this. One of the main concerns is the idea that Canada's speakers in the Belagavi region are being marginalized and oppressed.
Right, Belagavi.
This is a border dispute that has been going on for decades. It's a sensitive topic, lots of illusions involved.
For sure. Belagavi has been a point of contention for a long time with claims that the Canada-speaking minority living there aren't being treated fairly. And that ties directly into the second major demand, banning the Maharashtra Ekikaran Samiti, or MES. For anyone who doesn't know, the MES is a group that has historically pushed for Belagavi to become part of Maharashtra based on the languages spoken in the region. Karnataka's stance on this has been very clear. Belagavi belongs to Karnataka, end of story. So this demand to ban the MES really shows how strongly people feel about this border issue and how entrenched both sides are in their positions. It goes beyond politics, it's about identity, where people feel they belong.
Exactly. And beyond this really sensitive border issue, the band is also trying to shine a light on the fact that development in Karnataka isn't equal everywhere. There's a strong feeling, especially in the northern parts of the state, that they haven't gotten the same level of investment and attention from the government as places like Bengaluru. This idea that they've been left behind, developmentally speaking, has been a source of real discontent, and it keeps coming up in regional politics. And finally, they're demanding that the government get moving on some crucial water projects. They're specifically mentioning Mekadatu, Mahadai, and Kalasbanduri.
Big projects.
Yeah, these are vital for ensuring that different parts of the state have the water they need. But they've been bogged down by bureaucratic delays and arguments between states for a long time. So this ban is like a platform to amplify these long-standing grievances, border issues, regional development, managing essential resources, it's all there.
All right, so we've got these really significant, deeply rooted issues driving this call for a ban. Now, let's look at the people involved in the political side of things, because that always adds another layer of complexity, right?
Always.
A key figure here is Vatal Nagaraj, the leader of Canada Okuta. He's a well-known figure in Karnataka, very active in protests and activism. He's saying that over 1,500 associations are supporting this ban, giving it their moral support. But what's interesting is that, from what we can tell, there might be a difference between this claim support and actual action on the ground. You have to wonder, do people agree with the reasons for the ban, but maybe they're not so willing to actually shut down their businesses, especially on a Saturday when many are already closed?
You've hit on a really important point there, the difference between agreeing with something and actually doing something about it. Moral support could mean people sympathize with the goals, but they're not necessarily ready to cause the kind of disruption a traditional ban is supposed to have, especially if it's going to affect their income. It's also interesting to note that Deputy Chief Minister D.K. Shivakumar used to be very active in protests, but now that he's part of the government, he's been relatively quiet. Shows how your priorities and perspective can change when you go from leading protests to being the one responsible for governing. And then you've got the Bengaluru Police Commissioner issuing a clear warning against anyone trying to force businesses to close. That tells you something about the potential for some ban supporters to use strong-arm tactics, and it shows that the government is committed to keeping things peaceful and orderly, even if the organizers are pushing for a complete shutdown. Whether that warning will actually prevent businesses from being forced to close, well, we'll have to see how the day plays out.
So if you're trying to get through your day in Karnataka today, it sounds like it's going to be less of a widespread emergency and more of a situation with specific disruptions here and there. Probably a good idea to be prepared for trouble getting an auto rickshaw or a cab, especially in the bigger cities. If you had plans to see a movie early in the day, you might want to check if it's still on. But overall, looks like most essential services in the state will probably keep running, and even a lot of weekend leisure activities won't be affected. It seems like this ban is being shaped, maybe even toned down a bit by the fact that it's happening on a weekend.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. The issues that have led to this call for a ban are serious, and they reflect long-standing grievances about border disputes, unequal development, and the urgent need for better water management. But the real, tangible impact on most people's lives today seems to be somewhat limited, because it's a weekend, and a lot of things are already closed. This raises an interesting question for all of us to think about. Given the reasons behind this ban, and how much it's actually disrupting things, what does this tell us about how effective these big traditional protests are in our society today? And maybe even more importantly, how can we address these really deep-rooted issues in a more effective way? Maybe we need to move beyond just shutting down the entire state, especially when that shutdown coincides with the time when things are already quiet.
Lots to consider.
Definitely.
Well, thanks for breaking that all down for us.
Anytime.
This has been The Deep Dive.
See ya.
Until next time.